Welcome to the next episode of Battleground Chats on the sideline of the RMIA conference in Canberra for 2026. And I'm very pleased to have Zack Gurdon here. Zack, thank you for joining Battleground Chats.
Pleasure, Craig. Awesome to be here.
So how did you get into risk? How did you get to where you are? I won't tell anyone what you do now. We'll get there.
So, look, I started my corporate career in security and intelligence. So I was always fascinated with intelligence. So I almost went into defense, into an intelligence role, and I had a few offers when I graduated.
Okay.
And
well, what did you study that got you into that in the first place?
Well, I always wanted to be a pilot in the Air Force, but I wore glasses, so I didn't have back in those days 20/20 vision, so I couldn't do that. I did a security and international, like an intelligence course at Edith County University. Got out of that, I got offers from different organisations, a few defence and intelligence roles here in Canberra. Also got a role at Australia Post.
Okay.
So I hate cold weather.
So
Canberra was out of the question.
Yeah.
So I ended up taking up a role at Australia Post as a security risk advisor.
So security being physical security.
Yeah. Predominantly physical security, investigations and things of that nature.
Yep.
So that was in their corporate security function.
Yep.
So I spent a few years doing that, moved across. My director went from Australia Post to Telstra.
Yep.
He tapped me on the shoulder and said, "Oh, would you like to come and work for Telstra?" Which I did.
Yep. So in the physical security still?
Yeah, corporate security space. So
there's a trend.
There is a trend, and I think what I found, I spent 12 years at Telstra.
Wow.
And from the point of coming in as a corporate security advisor, I transitioned into a role as being the head of strategic risk by the time I
had
left.
So how did you do that? So let's unpack that a bit.
Right?
Yeah. What's interesting is through my podcast series, hearing people's journeys where they've begun, right? So there's people who've begun in engineering, people who've begun in finance, and they somehow have this break or something happens to get them into the risk world.
Yeah, I had that sort of sliding doors moment. So look, good security is underpinned by risk management.
Yep.
And so, I found myself being really interested in risk management as practice because I used it as a tool to get my recommendations implemented.
Did you know that's what it was at the time? Or
it was always the principles. It always was, but the reality is in the security environment, it's quite a technical exercise when you think about security risk. But taking that and then I thought, well, this is really interesting. How do I avoid being pigeonholed as a security person?
Yes.
Now, by about 2009, I was the head of corporate security.
Yep.
So it took me about 5 years. From coming in as a junior to be the head, and at that point, I've been in the role for about 18 months, and they recruited a CRO. Telstra, and she basically said to me, "Well, love it if you came and work for me." And I said, "Well, my skills."
As in move your functioning?
No. I want you to work for me in a risk role, right?
Okay.
Because at that point, I was using the language and the principles and the tools to underpin a lot of the arguments, a lot of the business cases that we used to produce, and that for me is what I found gave us a lot more traction.
Right.
And so, it was a bit of I could stay in the role and be pigeonholed and forever be the head of corporate security, or let's try something different. So I actually went sideways and down to a more junior role,
but in a more risk,
in a more expansive role where I managed a team doing operational risk.
Yeah.
And so I did that.
Was that hard?
It was hard because what I actually found, because I was always the expert in security, I was no longer the expert. Yeah. And so what it had to teach me is how do I actually lean on people and trust people who know more than what I do, because at the end of the day, I just didn't know as much as
and it would have been a huge learning curve.
Yeah, and you have to give up your sense of control of things because you just don't know enough.
Yeah.
So,
which is a really valuable skill.
It was incredibly valuable for me because I'm a very hands-on sort of person.
Yep.
And so I like I just want to get in there, and that can be seen by people as being, micromanaging. But nowadays, I'm very much, that taught me to trust people, get people in who are smarter than you, who know their stuff, and just let them go away and do their thing, and then you just clear the way so they can
make it easier for them to get their job done. I like that. I think that's where we met, right? At Telstra doing the risk and resilience.
Yeah, that's right. And so that was in the wrap up for me when I was still in corporate security. But I was responsible for the physical security infrastructure, business continuity, crisis management, pretty much everything in the security domain apart from investigations at that point.
And we were trying to understand, what does resilience mean?
Yeah, and still working through that now.
Still trying to work out 13, 15 years later.
Yeah. So I was like, we have to get into that because my thoughts haven't really changed a great deal. But I think the benefit of being in a risk role is you get to see the organisation end to end.
Yes.
So, I've worked in operational risk. I did strategic risk. I managed the risk function for the whole of Telstra eventually. So that's
which is no mean feat.
No, it's a pretty technical environment.
But it's also very big, right? It's big and bulky, and there's a lot of parts of Telstra.
Yeah, and there's a lot of vestiges of its sort of GBE days.
Yeah.
It wasn't a lean, stripped back corporate like it is.
And you have to break the culture, make it a corporate culture from the government.
Yeah, transitioned from that at Telstra eventually. Took up a role at NBN as the head of risk compliance and resilience.
Yes.
Doing a lot of the same thing, but it was an opportunity to do greenfields. They didn't really have an effective risk.
They didn't have anything. I mean, at that time, it was building NBN to be able to build the NBN.
Yeah, that's right. And so
there was a fascinating time to be there.
Yeah, so it was really, really interesting to see the sort of being involved in it when it's very much the pressure's on to build and deploy. And so building frameworks what it taught me though is that building approaches that are lean.
Yeah.
Because there isn't the capacity for the business because it's moving so fast.
And also it's greenfield. You don't have all the legacy stuff you have to deal with.
No, and there's not the regulatory drivers in that industry to say you must do risk management in a certain way. That's changing now. The SOCI Act and critical infrastructure is driving requirements.
Yes.
But back then that didn't exist. So it's matured in that space over time.
Okay, and so now you have moved on from telco.
Yep.
How did you move from NBN to where you are now?
So I was in my fourth year at NBN. I really enjoyed the build phase. Design, build, and deploy new frameworks. And so, I was getting to a point where things were embedded and working. So I wasn't actively thinking about a role, but I got tapped on the shoulder for the role of Chief Risk Officer at ASIC.
Yes.
Through one of my old mentors. So I thought, let's try that.
That's a change.
Yeah, and it's a change, but its context is completely different, obviously. Completely different. So what I was quite interested in is figuring out whether what I knew was actually applicable in a very different context.
Yes. And what have you learned?
It's very, it is very transferable.
Yeah.
Right. But it's only transferable if you're prepared to be really, really flexible about what you think good looks like. Because every organisation's personality and culture means that, good risk management does look quite different.
Yes.
And what's the level of appetite?
Yes.
Right. From your board or your senior management and your CEO to do risk management. So you got to try and figure out what that balance looks like, and then you've got to design your framework to suit
it. Yeah, interesting.
Yeah.
And going from quasi-government trying to change to startup to real government, was that a difficult mindset shift? Or
look, I think the biggest challenge is the levers are very different. So what drives the organisation? So, if you're doing enterprise risk management, it's all about, it's sort of how do you enable the business to achieve its objectives? So uncertainty impacts on objectives.
Yep.
And priorities. So when I came in, I was thinking along the lines of, cost, revenue, shareholder value, the traditional way to think.
Of course.
But you come from a regulator, But that's not relevant.
No.
I mean, a budget is certainly relevant, right?
Yeah.
But when
your stakeholders are not the same. The concept of the board's not the same.
So they're there to serve the public.
Yep.
They're there to protect the interests of the community and the public, to manage, manage orderly markets. There is always the public interest test. Should we be doing this? And so what I thought would resonate didn't. So I quickly learned in that first 6 months is that I've got to change tack here. So what matters, so you could get that type of buy-in that you need. Yeah. So I think that's probably for me the most important thing. The fundamental principles of risk management are the same.
Yes.
How you operationalize it looks different.
That's the difference.
And what's important there is context. So your industry, what matters to your industry, what matters to your business specifically. Once you understand that, then if you start to figure out what matters to management, what matters to the board, and way
then you're back in the same trend.
Yeah. And then you adjust your framework to see.
Now, last 2 minutes, resilience. So me and you've been talking about this for a long time. We invented this wheel at one point, and I'm going back now to when resilience was the buzzword, but no one knew what it meant. Was it above risk? Was it under risk? Was it part of risk?
Yeah.
What's happened in your thinking about resilience over the years?
Look, I think my thinking about it hasn't changed a great deal. I don't see resilience as a specific practice per se, but it's a collection of capabilities and attributes that your organisation has.
Yep.
And
is risk one of those?
Yeah. So, I mean, if you put that up, for me at least, if I visualise it on a continuum, you've got prevention, which is your risk management component.
Yep.
What matters to the business, what's critical, identifying what that is and helping the business mitigate those risks through new controls.
Yes.
That's sort of the prevent phase. Then you move into, you've got a response phase. What type of capability do you have? Incident management, crisis management, business continuity arrangements to respond to things.
Yep.
And then you've got, the recovery phase. So I've always sort of viewed it as risk management not being over or under. Risk management is just part of that.
On the continuum.
Yeah. So if I was going to say, what's resilience? Well, resilience is a combination of, good risk management,
which is preparedness,
good business continuity arrangements,
which is the response.
Yep. Crisis management, incident management arrangements, and your ability to recover and then learn from that. And then it's hopefully it's a bit of a virtuous cycle. You learn. You identify new risks, you start to close the gap on previous things that you've identified, and then you strengthen your resilience overall. And it's a combination for me. Complexity is killer with resilience. So
I love that. Complexity is the killer of resilience. It's so
really
true.
Because things just break and you just don't know what's going to happen.
Yeah.
It's so hard for your people to operate a complex environment.
Yeah, you've got to be agile.
Yeah, and you just got to have some simplicity in your processes and your system, which is never easy. I mean, every organisation deals with legacy, so you're always trying to work to the goal. You never really sort of get there.
Yeah,
but
100%.
But I do think I've played in all three spaces. Sort of across that prevent, response, recovery.
Yep.
For the last 15 years, and I don't think any one activity is necessarily more important than the other, but it works best when they're all
a system.
Yeah, and they're all they're working together. They may be adjacent to each other, some of these things, but at the end of the day, they deliver you resilience.
Yeah.
So that's why I struggle with concepts like resilience standards and things like that. I think it's more of
a combination of a number of different disciplines working together.
Yeah, lots of different things, and it's just as much about people as it is about systems and processes. We've spoken a lot about having the right leadership, to lead your CMT function, right? And things of that nature, and building confidence and capability in people to be able to respond to incidents, recover from incidents.
Yes.
So I think there's a lot of different things in play that you're sort of trying to work on. And then
absolutely. I couldn't agree with you more. I think that's why we get on well.
Yep, similar ideas. Great minds.
Exactly.
Yeah.
On that note, Zack, thank you so much for being a part of Battleground Chats.
Awesome. Much appreciated. Cheers, Greg.